Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. This should be the last day of the current sitting of the Legislature. The House sat till 2:15 this morning and should hopefully conclude before 6 o'clock this evening. This sitting has been the longest in Alberta history, 71 days, including 33 nights. The 33 nights is a new record for the number of evening sittings as well. So hopefully the House will wrap up today. At the moment, there are still 4 bills at second reading stage, so some of those will be held over, no doubt. There are 35 bills at third reading stage, and another 7 awaiting royal assent. In the private bill side, there are 11 at the committee of the whole stage, which will also go then to third reading stage and then be given royal assent later on this day. Thanks for being part of Alberta question period. Have a great, happy, and safe summer.
Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions.
Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table a petition that's been brought forward by 2 groups, Paid and Read, People Against Impaired Drivers, Research and Education on Impaired Driving. Mr. Speaker, there's some 1,300 names in support of my motion number 208, which was withdrawn from the order paper and replaced by a government bill, bill number 26.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I may have to have your help a little on this in view of the possible closing of the program of the House today. I wanted to introduce a bill that normally would come up Thursday, although I have them numbered and approved and so on. And I gather the procedure, Mr. Speaker, is to ask for the unanimous approval of the House to seek unanimous consent for the Assembly to introduce Bill 269, which is an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, notwithstanding the fact that the bill has not had the clear day's notice. Could I have that unanimous approval?
Are all members willing to give consent to this variation in procedure for this particular bill, 269? Please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries. And the member has introduced.
It leaves me drunk with power, so it allows me to try to ask again if I may seek also unanimous consent of the Assembly to introduce the Alberta Farm Security.
Order, please, honourable members. Let's not get this confused. We've now had unanimous consent to introduce that particular bill. Would you now just read the number and the title of that bill, then we'll go to the next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill is entitled it's Bill number 269, and it's entitled an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, which in fact gives municipalities an input into the type of entertainment approved by the Alberta Liquor Control Board.
All those in favor of the first reading of Bill 269, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 269, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Taylor, is now read a first time.
Is the House prepared to extend the same courtesy with regard to Bill 271 as sponsored by the member for Westlock Sturgeon? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Westlock Sturgeon, 271.
Bill number 271, Mr. Speaker, is entitled an Alberta Farm Security Act and is modeled on the Farm Security Act that was recently passed in Saskatchewan, which protects the home quarter and goes other things to do with being able to stop too hasty a foreclosure, particularly by the government's own agencies.
All those in favor of first reading of Bill 271, Alberta Farm Security Act, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 271, Alberta Farm Security Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Taylor, is now read a first time.
Would the House be gracious enough to extend the same courtesy to the member for Calgary-Buffalo with regard to Bill 270, that we might have unanimous consent for introduction at first reading? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce a bill being an act to amend the Law of Property Act, the purpose of which is to help over 50,000 Albertans with royalty interests in this province.
The honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo has moved first reading of Bill 270, an act to amend the Law of Property Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 270, an act to amend the Law of Property Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Schumer, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being Bill 268, which I did have the foresight to put on notice, Mr. Speaker. The title of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is the Alberta...
Choke you to death one of these days.
The title of the bill is the Alberta Arts Board Act, Mr. Speaker. It would establish the Alberta Arts Council, which is a voluntary association which on an annual basis would elect members to the Alberta Arts Board, that body being the body which would adjudicate applications for funding for cultural endeavours at a ratio of 50% plus one as elected members, and the remaining members being appointed by Lieutenant Governor and Council.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill 268, Alberta Arts Board Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 268, Alberta Arts Board Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time. Reports.
The Minister of the Environment, followed by Transportation and Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure. Well, Mr. Speaker, somebody invited me to lunch, so I bought a jacket. Actually, the Premier told me, gave me heck last week and told me to be a little sharper, so I went out and bought some new clothes. But Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to table with the Legislative Assembly today the 1987 Annual Report in the Environment Council of Alberta.
Transportation and Utilities.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the annual report of the Alberta Electric Energy Marketing Agency for the year 1987-88.
Provincial Treasurer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm filing today certain responses for motions for return 176, 197, 204, and written question 208.
Minister of Community and Occupational Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'm tabling today the response to motion for return number 200, and as well I have the pleasure of tabling with the Assembly the first annual report of the Department of Community and Occupational Health for the year ended March 31, 1987, and as well the 70th annual report of the Workers' Compensation Board of Alberta for the year ended December 31, 1987.
Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the response to question number 207.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the Alberta Liquor Control Board 64th Annual Report for the fiscal year ended January 5th, 1988.
Introduction of special guests.
Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and members of the Assembly a special guest staying at my house, although I just met him a few minutes ago. He's been there a couple nights, I think. But, Mr. Speaker...
Say where you've been. Say you've been in the house.
Mr. Speaker, this gentleman's name is Greg Kaywood. He's from Leeds, England. And he's accompanied by a new friend, Dan Beharry, from Edmonton. They are seated in the public gallery. I would ask them to stand and receive the warm applause of the Assembly.
Member for Red Deer North.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce a delegation of ministers here today. Not cabinet ministers, these are real ministers. And heading up the group is Reverend Albert Lindolf, who has dedicated his lifetime to serving others, and is especially fond of his association with the late John Diefenbaker. Representing British Columbia is Reverend Lyle Preston, and representing unique inner-city ministry to the homeless is Richard Martin. I would ask the three men if they would stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly today.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has hired Riel LeBlanc as his new Deputy Minister effective June the 17th, 1988, Brian Mulrooney's old university buddy. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. LeBlanc has been the subject of an investigation by the Comptroller General of Canada for his handling of certain consulting contracts with a computer consulting firm known as CACI Canada Limited. My question to the Minister: will the Minister advise whether he obtained knowledge of the circumstances of the Comptroller General's investigation of Mr. LeBlanc's handling of the government contracts prior to making the appointment of Mr. LeBlanc as his deputy?
First, might I say, Mr. Speaker, that the innuendo contained in the preamble to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's question, for the most part, is totally inaccurate and should not have been repeated in the House. But with respect to the question, the matter of the allegations contained in the Globe and Mail story this morning with respect to Mr. LeBlanc are the subject of consideration by the Deputy Minister of the Executive Council, and until that is complete, I don't have any further comments to make on that.
Speaker, that's not good enough. It's all right to look in it after. We want to know what happened before, and that was my question.
You know what you're doing, Marlon?
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that there was a gap of a few months between Mr. LeBlanc's departure as Commissioner of Correctional Services Canada and his appointment as a deputy. And I'm wondering why this minister would appoint an individual to the highest level of authority in his department without determining why his resignation from Correctional Service Canada, if in fact that was connected to the CICI contract. Why wouldn't you check that?
First of all, I've said, Mr. Speaker, the matter of the allegations in the Globe and Mail report are being looked into. But again, the honourable member is totally wrong. He reads the newspaper and thinks that's the gospel truth. The facts of the matter are that Mr. LeBlanc came to work for our department after, or he was hired, I should say, by our department before he resigned his federal post. And it was only a matter of some 2 or 3 weeks from his departure there until he went to work here, at which time he was on holidays. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, as a game, maligned somebody without any foundation whatsoever.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's move back to Alberta. In view of the fact that Mr. LeBlanc was the Deputy Solicitor General here in Alberta, during the time when the Auditor General said in 1985, and I quote, "As a result of the Department of the Solicitor General's senior financial management failing to provide appropriate direction and control during the development and implementation of a major new computer system for its motor vehicles division, financial accounting and control were seriously impaired." That was in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. Did the minister even check into what was going on in the Solicitor General's department at that time before he made this appointment?
Mr. Speaker, the allegations contained in the Globe and Mail report are being looked into by the Deputy Minister of the Executive Council, and the allegations just now made and repeated by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition will be looked into as well. And if he has any additional allegations to make, he may wish to make them now verbally or in writing, and we'll look into them.
Mr. Speaker, clearly somebody has to do the job for this minister, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. Not doing his own work.
Now, my last question to this minister then, is the minister even aware that CIC Canada Limited was also involved with the Solicitor General's Department during that time, and that Mr. Anderson of CICI served under Mr. LeBlanc as the director of the department's counseling services? Was he aware of that?
The innuendo that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition persists in putting out in this House is nothing more than what he read in the Globe and Mail, for the most part. Whether or not that is accurate in any way, shape, or form, I don't know. That matter is being investigated, and it will be fully investigated. What the Leader of the Opposition might wish to do when he leaves the question period is make the same allegations toward the Deputy Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care that he has just made in the House outside of the House, so that individual might take appropriate action.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon. Westlock Sturgeon. Thank you, opposition members. Westlock Sturgeon is recognized.
Speaker, supplemental to the minister, could the minister tell this House whether he discussed this issue with Mr. LeBlanc's former employer, the Federal Solicitor General, Mr. Kelleher? Has he talked to Mr. Kelleher?
Mr. Speaker, I can say this, that before the hiring of any deputy minister is done, there's a very thorough review done of the performance of that individual and other jobs. Recommendations are sought. There is a committee that involves the Deputy Minister of the Executive Council that looks into a variety of matters. As I said earlier, the matter of these allegations that are nothing more than allegations at this point in time contained in a Globe and Mail report are being looked into. It's inappropriate for me to make further comments until we have a better understanding of the true facts.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In less than 2 years, the current Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care has flip-flopped on more than 12 policy issues affecting the health of Albertans. Mr. Speaker, these include one that the Minister announced that the Millwoods and Peter Lougheed hospitals were to be mothballed, and then, of course, he opened them. That Bill 14 was to privatize health insurance, and then he withdrew it. That a fees agreement with the Alberta Medical Association was reached, and then he breached it. That several preventative health services were de-insured, then he reinsured.
Okay, honourable member, let us come.
It is a long list, Mr. Speaker. I know.
We're not going to have the long list.
Hospital funding was announced to be 2.2%. Now it's been bumped up to 4%, and 5%, and 6%. Can the minister now offer one good reason why average Albertans ought to believe any announcement that he may make, since his track record has been so abysmal over the last 2 years?
Mr. Speaker, for an honourable member who has such a callous disregard for the truth, that's a rather outstanding statement. The facts of the matter are, starting with the first preamble to the honourable member's question, Mr. Speaker, the Millwoods Hospital was scheduled to be constructed and opened at the same time as the Edmonton General Hospital was going to be open to a large extent as an active treatment hospital too. My statement at the time was that it was not possible, in my view, financially, to open the new Millwoods Hospital and at the same time keep the Edmonton General Hospital open as a full-service active treatment hospital. The member will recall, if he can think that far back, that situation changed and the Edmonton General became, for all intents and purposes, an auxiliary hospital and a long-term care centre, and so we were able to provide more funding to open the Millwoods Hospital. Now, I can go on and on about a number of decisions that have been made, Mr. Speaker. They've all been good decisions in my view. The facts of the matter are that hospital boards across this province were asked last year to take a 3% cut in their entire budgets, and coupled with about a 4 or 5% inflation, that meant a reduction of about 8%. This year, after we know what the facts are with regard to the cost of operating the hospitals, and I have said in this House on many occasions over the last 2 months that we were reviewing every single hospital board's budget. Having completed that work, we now are in a position to provide some additional funding. On balance, the increase over 2 years in hospital board budgets is about 1% per year. Outstanding performance by hospital boards in maintaining cost increases that are very acceptable in the economic climate we have in Alberta today. Mr. Speaker, we should all be proud that hospital boards were able to do that, and there's been nothing wrong at all with the government's approach to funding hospitals.
Well, there's another flip-flop, Mr. Speaker. The minister said it was going to be a world-class geriatric facility in Edmonton. Now it's an auxiliary hospital. What kind of reversal is that? Can the minister please advise which other cabinet minister, or deputy minister for that matter, does have the final say on health matters, since this minister obviously has had to been forced to reverse his own stated position so many times?
Fortunately, Mr. Speaker, it's not the member from Edmonton Centre.
Great. Well, some would wonder, Mr.
Not the minister of
some would wonder.
either.
Can the minister then confirm that the reason for this remarkable litany of policy flip-flops has been that the cabinet itself is so deeply divided, had to bring in the Hyman Commission to sort things out, or that, like the Stephen Leacock's Great Detective, they're just riding off in all directions?
Next question.
We'll leave it for Big Lou to figure it out. Does the minister really enjoy being constantly embarrassed by such forced flip-flops, which have more flop than flip to them, I might add, or will he, for the consistent health of Albertans, simply resign this position?
The question has no place in question period. Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar. Edmonton Goldbar.
He might resign.
Edmonton Goldbar.
He might just be waiting for
Goldbar. Edmonton Goldbar, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the minister's not going to resign, instead of simply lurching at problems to keep the lid on them, will the minister now please sit down and review the situation with the AHA, the Alberta Hospital Association, Mr. Speaker, to develop some collaborative stability in hospital services and in hospital funding so that we know what we can expect over the next years?
Mr. Speaker, it's extremely difficult for the AHA or any hospital board to know several months in advance what their costs are going to be in terms of wage settlements or a lot of other variabilities that occur from time to time. What we have done in this province every year, with the exception of last year, for at least the last 10 years, is we've established a base budget for hospitals, and then we have increased that over the course of the year as known costs came in with respect to wage settlements and so on. We also had a system for many years where hospital boards were able to appeal their budget based upon increased costs. What we are doing this year is no different than what we've done time and time again, and that is we established a 1.5% increase in January. That was later increased to about 2.2% or 2.1% when the nurses' salary settlement was known. And over the course of the last 2 months, I've advised in this House at least a dozen times that we are working with every hospital board to see if what kind of additional funding they need in order to maintain their operations and not close beds or reduce services. And we completed that work, and we've now announced additional funding. That is the procedure that we intended to follow, and it's one that we've now completed.
Overbar.
Speaker, supplementary to the provincial treasurer, in light of the fact that we seem to have discovered some spare money, because we've added on to the physiotherapists, chiropractors, now $60 million to hospital. Can the provincial treasurer indicate if this is because the provincial treasurer underestimated the projected revenue, or because of the efficiency in the department that we've been able to come up with this new money?
Or because of election.
Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt that additional expenditures of the order now responded to by the Minister of Hospitals are important in the context of the situation facing the hospital system and other systems. And I think it's a reasonable response for us to make the moves that the Minister has announced. But of course, in the financial consideration, it is, of course, additional dollars which the government will have to find. I think in terms of our forecast, we're still reasonably accurate as to what is expected to be our potential deficit for this year. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, we are a bit ahead, of course, in terms of our fiscal plan with respect to 1987 and 1988. So we do have some flexibility on a multi-year approach to this problem. Needless to say, Mr. Speaker, this kind of response is the way in which this government has operated. If it's necessary for us to provide first-class medical accommodation, as we've indicated, or for that matter, to reinforce our priority in education, we'll find the dollars to do it, and that's essentially what's happened here today.
Leader,
Mr. Speaker, inasmuch as the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care reports to myself as Chairman of the Executive Council, I think it should be clear that the people of Alberta are pleased that they have a minister who has the guts to try and deal with one of the most difficult problems facing Canadians. And that we have a minister who has the guts to do that, not merely whining and complaining like the members opposite.
I'm sure the House will join me in recognizing the Leader of the Liberal Party for this main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice to know little orphan Moore has a friend, anyhow. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Premier. On June the 24th, Mr. Speaker, says Jean de Baptiste Day, the province of Newfoundland announced that it will spend between $15 and $20 million, Mr. Speaker, on new equal pay for work of equal value program for the Newfoundland Public Service. Now, Mr. Speaker, this follows Nova Scotia and Manitoba, also conservative governments, which in turn followed a couple of Liberal governments, Quebec and Ontario, in recognizing inequity in the workforce and how women are versus men. It's only the second sentence, Mr. Speaker. Very short sentences for what I usually use. To the Premier, a short question then. When will we be seeing pay equity legislation in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member talks about the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care having a friend. I might say, Mr. Speaker, he is surrounded by his supporters on this side of the House. That's certainly not true of the honourable member on his side of the House.
Could he not remember the question? What's the answer?
Mr. Speaker, the Premier's tenuous hold in reality is very well known, but nevertheless, I asked the question only 10 seconds ago, and the retention factor is very poor there, so let's go on a little bit farther. When do we need study? Why do we need more studies? I'm sure I'm anticipating the Premier's answer because I saw the House Leader whisper it to him. Why do we need more studies in Alberta when 3 out of 4 conservative provinces in the East have already put that in?
Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader's party would operate that way. If whatever anyone else does, he would follow. In Alberta, we have by law that we have equal pay for equal work. And that has stood up and been a fact of life in this province for some time and is supported by Albertans. The honourable member is trying to impose on Alberta what happens in other provinces. We don't do it that way. We make sure before we do things that it's the best for Alberta.
That's clear. We also hire the rejects of everybody else too. But, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the government's plan of action for women, which is being developed in conjunction with the so-called Alberta Dialogue, Mr. Speaker, of economic equity for women, will this include pay equity for legislation for women?
As I said, Mr. Speaker, by law in this province, it's equal pay for equal work. That is the law, and that is the way we will develop our policies. The Honourable Minister responsible for women's issues has commenced a dialogue on other ways in which we can be responsive to women's issues, and should any of them require additional moves by the government, then of course we'll follow them through, because we have always been working to provide the greatest opportunities possible to women in this province.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. It's a funny way of trying to keep women in the home does the Premier explain then why women in Alberta in general earn between 60 and 65 cents in comparison to every dollar men earn for the same jobs in Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if they are doing equal work, then they receive equal pay.
That's right. That's quite right. Edmonton Avonmore, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. To the Premier. Does the Premier not recognize that even the International Labour Organization, to which Canada is a signatory, has a covenant that recognizes that there will not be justice for women until there is equal pay for work of equal value? That is, goes beyond equal pay for equal work, but equal pay for work of equal value.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can quote some international body if she wishes. I'm telling her what the law is in Alberta, and it is a law supported by Albertans.
Leader of the Representative Caucus.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development, and it relates to the Alberta Opportunity Company. As of late, I've had the opportunity of reviewing a number of the press releases of the Alberta Opportunity Company and note a number of loans to various kinds of businesses and entities in the province of Alberta. Also note that some of the loans that are made could also, I think, possibly be made by the Treasury branches or regular lending agencies. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is with regards to just that. Could the Minister assure this House that all of those loans that have been made by the Alberta Opportunity Company could not have been made by regular lending institutions in this province?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member might recall the throne speech of about 16 months ago, where the government announced a change in focus in terms of policy direction for the Alberta Opportunity Company. And reference, I believe, in the throne speech was a request by the government to the Board of Directors of AOC to, rather than continuing to be a lender of last resort, to be a provider of creative financing. And I believe that the recent performance by the Alberta Opportunity Company responds to that government directive.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question then to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate then what procedure is used in terms of this creative financing that would take into consideration that matter of regular lending agencies being able to creative finance as well? What is the difference?
Mr. Speaker, I would suspect that the honourable member might want to seek further information from the Board of Directors, but I would provide him with a general idea of the process that is used. There is a Board of Directors that is responsible for the Alberta Opportunity Company, that is private sector individuals from across this province who deal with the individual loan applications at their regular board meetings twice a month after those applications have been dealt with by the staff of the corporation.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of a specific question to the Minister, I note that two private insurance agencies and one business described as a holding company for chartered accountants has been provided with loans. Could the Minister indicate the uniqueness of those types of businesses that would qualify under the Alberta Opportunity Company's lending program?
Mr. Speaker, I can't comment on the specifics that the honourable member has raised, except to say that the Alberta Opportunity Company over the course of a year provides financial assistance to between 300 and 400 Alberta companies, and over the course of its history has provided support to Alberta companies that total about 5,000. And recently the company has embarked on a program which we're pleased with of providing venture capital financing. It would be impossible, Mr. Speaker, for me to be able to comment on one of 5,000 or two of 5,000 loans that the corporation has made.
Mr. Speaker, final to either the Premier or the Provincial Treasurer, it's with regards to the broad cross number of lending agencies that government has established in the last few years, the Treasury branches, the Alberta Opportunity Company, VENCAP, the Alberta Agriculture Development Corporation, the Alberta Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Is there any consideration by government in terms of reviewing those various lending agencies of consolidating them or reorganizing them under one agency of government?
Mr. Speaker, those lending organizations, of course, have been developed over some 14 or 15 years of government action to assist Albertans. In the course of that period of time, there's always reviews to make sure that the services which they deliver are delivered in the most efficient, effective way possible to Albertans. In some cases, that leads to a consideration of amalgamation or even elimination of some. And as the honourable member knows, there has been a review of, for instance, he mentions ADC. There's been a review of ADC already, and changes being made.
Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, from time to time, the various organizations in the government that do lend money will end up foreclosing and receiving land, for example, as foreclosed collateral. Is there any effort made in this government to ensure that the marketing of land owned by the government is done through a single agency to avoid cross-competition which might affect prices that can be received for the sale of that land?
I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member didn't direct the question to anybody, but obviously that would be considered in any assessment, although when you think of it, one is dealing in the area of homes, the other is in the area of farmland, that while there is a coordination, it does not appear from our point of view wise to have it all lumped under one body.
Member for Chinook, followed by Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. Although the rainfall in the past days has been more than generous in and around the city of Edmonton, it's my understanding that there are areas of our province that are experiencing high winds and little or no precipitation today. Would the Minister inform the Assembly of the current conditions in the province?
Mr. Speaker, we're all very thankful for the rains that have fallen, but unfortunately, even acknowledging that the rains have been fairly general, there are pockets throughout the province that are still suffering in a very severe way from the dry conditions. And if one examines a map of the province, we still have areas that there is reason for deep concern.
Supplementary again to the Minister. Last week, the Minister met with the Honourable John Wise to discuss drought assistance for the province. Would the Minister be prepared to inform the Assembly as to our participation in that provincial federal cost-shared program?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is correct. On June the 30th, we had the opportunity to be present when the Federal Minister of Agriculture announced a federal and provincial program. And I'm happy to report to the Assembly today that this morning, Cabinet, on behalf of the Premier and the Government of Alberta, concurred in an additional $31.5 million to offset the dry conditions within the province. Mr. Speaker, this is in addition to the $23.5 million that the Premier announced some time ago under our Water Supplies Assistance Program, bringing our provincial participation to a total of some $55 million. Mr. Speaker, this $31.5 million we have committed today is on a 50-50 cost-sharing basis with a threefold program that we are going to participate with the federal government. One, a forage program. Secondly, a per-herd payment. And also, Mr. Speaker, we're delighted that the federal government, in their wisdom, saw their way to accept our recommendation as it relates to tax deferral for our livestock producers in the province of Alberta.
Good job.
Again to the Minister, I'm sure that our producers will be very heartened by this program that's announced, but being a representative of a rural constituency, I certainly understand the problems that we encounter when we try to implement a drought program, and that guidelines will have to be set out for them. Has the minister determined how drought areas will be defined?
Mr. Speaker, just prior to responding to the honourable member's question, may I take this opportunity too to commend the honourable member for Chinook, the honourable member for St. Paul, Bow Valley, Cypress Red, Philip Traber Warner. We can go through a long list of individuals like yourself who were very kind in offering their support for this specific program. We have indicated in our news release today, as did the federal government, that we are going to go on the basis of the forage insurance program experience, so that there will be a feathering of the support payments that go to our individual producers. There are going to be two payments to a maximum of $30 each, one based on the inventory July the 1st, 1988, and one based on April 1st, 89 inventory. But we are sure that the program will be very well accepted, and we are making it a province-wide program based solely on the forage insurance program experience.
Little Bow, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary question to the minister. Could the minister indicate whether any consideration is being given towards transportation of costs of cattle that have to be moved from one area to the province, to another area in terms of grazing facilities?
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the honourable member for Little Bow, I acknowledge also that he put questions to the Associate Minister the same day that I was meeting with the Federal Minister when he announced this program. It was decided in consultation with the cattle people that they best decide how they could use the funds that are going to be made available to them themselves rather than have any special program. So there isn't going to be any special transportation subsidy or allocation, but there is going to be a per head payment whereby they can best use those funds as they see fit themselves.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, it's to the minister with regard to the per head treatment, and because of the fact that I don't know whether the minister's been seeding clouds or what, that there's so much rain around the province that obviously we would have some funds in there. Could the minister not agree to increase the $30 allotment, say, to $40 or $45, thereby bringing a total cost of $75, because there's so much less dry area to worry about now and fewer cattle?
Mr. Speaker, we put the program together in consultation with our federal counterparts and with the individuals involved with the livestock industry. They felt, in view of the fact that they have had fairly good years in the short time past, that this would be sufficient.
Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. The Minister recognizes that there are many areas of the province where the forage insurance program wasn't available last year, and some of these areas experienced drought last year and very dry conditions this spring. There's a severe shortage of hay in some areas. Is there a retroactive consideration to any of the programs that the government is now involved in with the federal government in terms of providing hay or paying for hay already purchased by farmers in those affected areas?
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to the honourable member, the per head payment will be based on inventory taken on July the 1st of this year and April the 1st of next year. We did include some retroactivity provisions in the initial program that was announced by the Premier, our water supplies program, to take into account some of the concerns that were expressed by the individuals within the St. Paul area. In addition to that, we also increased the retroactivity provisions as it relates to water wells, dugouts, and our water hauling programs to take into account the concerns just expressed by the honourable member.
Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some questions on behalf of some Edmonton residents who don't appreciate all of the rain. Residents in the Lake District in my riding are again experiencing flooding of basements, and it's a frequent and ongoing problem in their neighborhood. Many of the residents of the area feel that the developer should have known that such a low-lying area would require a better sewer system, and that the city should have been aware of this need as well. For the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, will the minister undertake to investigate this situation to determine if there was any negligence or cutting of corners on the part of the private developer who developed the Lake District?
It wouldn't be me, is it? Mr. Speaker, I don't believe the responsibility for that would fall within my portfolio. I do believe development permits are a municipal affair.
Yes, if they were not following rules, then it should be the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs who investigates, and I wonder if she will also investigate to determine whether or not residents deserve compensation from the developer for the reason just cited, for damage from repeated flooding or for increased insurance rates due to repeated flooding.
Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is discussing civil remedies that flow from contracts which are a private matter between individuals, and in that event he would be looking at, again, a remedy that would not fall within the responsibility of the government.
We're looking at a problem that nobody wants to solve. Will the Premier have the Minister of Municipal Affairs investigate my constituents' concerns that the city did not adequately review plans for an installation of sewers in the area?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member is making that as a declaration that happened, then I would draw it to the attention of the Minister of Municipal Affairs. If the honourable member is merely asking if that happened, obviously it's hypothetical. Nevertheless, I will pass on to the Minister of Municipal Affairs the import of his questions.
Thank you. I was saying that many residents of the area say that was the case. Will the Premier have Cabinet consider the possibility of provincial assistance to help the city replace the inadequate sewer system of the Lake District on the fastest possible schedule?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member surely has some regard for taxpayers and the amount of dollars that they can put into matters. Perhaps he doesn't. Maybe that is the socialist way.
Right.
As far, Mr. Speaker, as the City of Edmonton, they should be represented by a mayor and council. Maybe not.
Member for Bow Valley, followed by Calgary, Buffalo, and Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, I have some questions to the Minister of Agriculture also on his recently announced program. And first has to do with the tax deferral program. Could the Minister tell us what portion of the money from forced sales of livestock from drought will the taxes be deferred on, and for how long?
Mr. Speaker, when we met with the provincial or the federal Minister of Agriculture, he indicated that the federal Minister of Finance was going to introduce provisions to change the Income Tax Act whereby the federal minister could designate, in the event that he desired so, a drought area. And once that legislation was passed, he was going to designate the three prairie provinces as a drought area. And it would be a graduated scale as it relates to the tax deferral, whereby there would be no tax deferral on the first 15% of the sales. There would only be a 30% tax deferral on the second 15%, and on the remaining 70%, there would be a 90% tax deferral.
Supplementary, also referring to the program and the $15 an acre that farmers can collect for crops seeded after June 21st to July 31st, would these crops also be eligible for a payout of all-risk crop insurance if they have been devastated by drought prior to that time?
Mr. Speaker, the Associate Minister had announced some provisions as it relates to hail and crop insurance, whereby we wanted to relax the provisions so that individuals could take advantage of using seeded crops for pasture purposes in the event that it was required. I would report to the honourable member that the $15 per acre that is going to be offered for those who do plant between June the 21st and July the 31st for purposes of hay, silage, or pasture.
Further supplementary, Mr. Speaker, the per head basis will be paid out on the basis of collection of the all-risk crop insurance on in areas. Could the minister tell us if in certain areas no one has taken out the all-risk crop insurance, would they still be able to collect some portion of that $60 per head?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have received the assurance from the Hail and Crop Insurance Corporation that they still do have the mechanisms in place to gauge sufficiently the payouts that individual farmers would be available for.
Calgary, Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, from whom we'll hopefully get some answers with respect to free trade. The Government of Canada has been lobbying madly to stop United States business interests from forcing into free trade legislation a provision which will make United States investigations of Canadian subsidy programs more likely rather than less likely under free trade. Now, this is of fundamental importance to Alberta, since we have over $2 billion of loans, grants, and guarantees to forest companies, packing plants, and other businesses in order to encourage diversification. And I note in the government's booklet here with respect to free trade at page 5, they say, therefore, while regional development programs are still permissible, they may also be subject to countervailing duty action if they are large enough to distort trade and cause injury to the United States. I'm wondering, with respect to these $2 billion of programs, it's fair to say that the government, by its policy, of the view that these loans, grants, and guarantees are necessary in order to encourage diversification of this province. The people of Alberta want, in simple terms, to know why we're so involved in helping business.
Mr. Speaker, through the course of the negotiations that resulted in the free trade agreement that we anticipate will be signed soon, both the United States and Canada's negotiators were well aware of the programs of support that had been undertaken and were under consideration. And one of the key factors that was agreed to by both sides was that there had to be some flexibility to allow regional economic development to occur in Canada, and that was agreed to by both parties. I believe that the honourable member may be anticipating concerns that do not exist.
You anticipate concerns in your free trade document, where at page 24 you say that loan guarantees are less likely to be countervailed than direct government financial assistance. You're talking about problems. I'm wondering whether the minister will agree that there's significant doubt under free trade about our capacity to continue with these loans, grants, and guarantee programs, natural gas subsidies in business, and so on. Without these, we're going to be locked into our position as suppliers of primary materials and can kiss goodbye to diversification.
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. We believe and are confident that Canada, and particularly in our area of responsibility, Alberta, has an enormous opportunity to access markets in the United States, not just in primary products, but in value-added products, as evidenced by the market opportunities in agricultural products, petrochemical downstream products, high-value, low-weight plastics. There are a whole range of both hard products and software that Canadians and Albertans in particular can market in the United States, because we are now doing it and we're now competitive in that market.
Yeah, but the issue is our $2 billion of subsidies as the U.S. starts to look more closely. And I'd like to ask the minister to deal with a concrete example and ask the minister if he'll tell this House why the $4 million provincial grant to Cargill Packing and the $12 million grant to Gainers for packing plants wouldn't be considered by United States packers facing competition from those plants to be unfair subsidies.
Thank you, honourable member. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member should perhaps do a little more careful research. The support to Gainers is not a grant. I think it's been described in the House on a number of occasions, and if the member would pay attention, he would have known that it's a $12 million loan at commercial interest rates. With respect to the sub-agreement that Alberta has with the federal government for agricultural development, the negotiators from the United States and the Canadian negotiators are well aware of the sub-agreements for agricultural processing that exist in Alberta between the federal government and the provincial government.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the free trade agreement provides for a 5 to 7 year period for defining permissible subsidies, and we just don't know what those are. I'm wondering why the minister doesn't recognize how important this is and argue and set in motion a process for deciding that issue within 2 years rather than waiting the 5 to 7 years, so that we can know where we stand without getting locked into an agreement that we can't get out of.
Mr. Speaker, a lot of us fail to understand the reluctance of some members in the Assembly to appreciate the value to Canadians of being able to access a market of 235 million people. And the terms and conditions under which Canadians can access that market have been negotiated over a 2-year period. Now, over the next number of years, certain matters need to be resolved, particularly as it relates to disputes resolution. That, we have no doubt, can be worked out. But the opportunities for Canadians to have our economy grow and to increase job creation is simply phenomenal. And those who are afraid of entering into an agreement to trade with a neighbor, I believe, are not current on what the people of Canada would like to see happen to their economy.
Member for Vegreville, main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister of Agriculture. The Minister is well aware that there's been some problems with potential bank interest overcharges. The banks prior to 1982 were using fixed interest rate notes and charging variable interest rates, and the likely cost to many farmers in Alberta has been tens and perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra money paid in interest to the banks. Is the Minister aware that under the Limitation of Action Act, many farmers will soon no longer be able to pursue cases against lending institutions for excessive interest charges?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I'm glad the Minister is aware, and he should also be aware that all this money that's been taken out of farmers' pockets, perhaps illegally, is money taken out of rural communities as well. And I'm wondering if the Minister, because he's apparently concerned about the statute of limitations, if he would direct his department to mount a public information campaign to make sure farmers in Alberta are aware of the statute of limitations so that they can get their claims in prior to that timeline.
Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions and also to have the Minister of Energy give additional and supplementary information from the previous question period? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to take under consideration the honourable member from Vegreville's suggestion that we do conduct some type of advertising campaign to the extent to make the farming population aware that there is certain time constraints under the statute of limitations. I should share with the honourable member, though, that we have had consultations with the chap who, and I call him as he calls himself, the borrower's advocate, whereby we've done everything possible to offer assistance and help through our office. We've also worked with Winston Eldersma, who is a lawyer who has acted on behalf of a number of our farmers.
Well, it's very clear, Mr. Speaker, that farmers shouldn't be made to pay for the mistakes of the banks and lending institutions. Now, the Treasury branch is... the Treasury branches are involved in this as well, Mr. Speaker, and it's my understanding that they're not obliged to invoke the Limitation of Action Act. And the effective date for the Treasury branches is October 15th of 1988. And I'd like to ask the Treasurer if he would make representation on behalf of farmers to the Treasury branch to make sure that they don't use the statute of limitations as a mechanism to avoid repaying their clients who trusted them to be fair and treat them fairly with interest charges.
Mr. Speaker, when this became an issue about 4 or 5 months ago, and frankly I expected a question on it much sooner than this, Mr. Speaker, I asked the Treasury branches to review the way in which they proceeded with the loan portfolio. And they did advise me that they do have some trouble with some of the loans, that in fact they did not agree with the terms of the loan agreement. Not because they're above it, Mr. Speaker, but in all cases because their loan interest was charged below the current rates provided for in the agreement, and therefore the Treasury branches in fact have recognized fully the plight of the farmer much sooner than the member across the way has, and have adjusted their schedule accordingly as a result of government policy going back to 1983-84.
Well, Mr. Speaker, any farmer who paid interest rates in the late 70s and early 80s know that interest rates were going up, not down.
That's right.
And I'd like to...
Sit down, Dick.
Tricky.
I'd like the provincial treasurer to give us his assurance that the Treasury branches will not use the statute of limitations as a mechanism to avoid settling these claims, and that they are not trying to impede in any way the farmers' access to the documentation that they need to initiate these claims against the Treasury Branch.
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm two things. First of all, that interest rates do go up and down. The member has now discovered that. It's interesting that he suddenly has come to that realization, Mr. Speaker, but what I have said clearly here is that the Treasury branches and this government, far in advance of any considerations as a result of the member from Vegreville, have in fact dealt with that problem. The Treasury branches, as a result of government policy, and I know it's before the member's time, had a specific policy in place in 1981-82 which provided a premium, Mr. Speaker, to farmers and to small businessmen. We actually told the Treasury branches to set the rates below the current market levels, and that's where the Treasury branches that's how they reacted. And that's exactly the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker, that we saw the problem, we provided the compromise, and we have no problem with the policy Treasury branches have faced. We were well in advance, Mr. Speaker, and very sensitive to the issues of farmers and small businessmen, and the policy is in place to prove it, Mr. Speaker.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister of Agriculture and probably back to Treasurer too, since they're responsible for the two lending organizations, AGC and Treasury branches, and further to the statute of limitations, but more on the personal covenant. Will the minister take pains to see that, both ministers take pains to see that a new directive going out to managers of their different departments around Alberta tells these managers that they cannot pursue on the personal covenant in view of the recent recent court actions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not a question of us telling agencies what to do. It's a matter of what is the law. And as the Court of Appeal has in fact said, Mr. Speaker, when the government sets foot inside the courtroom, it does on the same basis as all other Albertans. That means that under foreclosures, we do not have the right to pursue personal guarantees. And that, Mr. Speaker, is a law.
Minister of Energy, with regard to question is raised by Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, it's reference to questions yesterday in the House raised by the member from Calgary, Buffalo. When the honourable member asked a question related to the proportional sharing of resources to the U.S., Mr. Speaker, he indicated that, in fact, a 3% cut in U.S. Exports would require a 10% cut in Canadian production. Extending the same kind of reasoning, you get to the point where a 30% cut in reduction in the U.S. would mean a 100% cut in Canadian production. I might be so bold as to suggest, Mr. Speaker, that even Dostoevsky's idiot would not have erred to that degree in logic. Mr. Speaker, the situation is that access to the United States is in relation to historically purchase volumes, and that it would be Canada and not the United States that would invoke any cause for any reductions. And there'd be 4 reasons that were given for that were outlined in, I believe, in the document the honourable member referred to yesterday, namely short supply, or to conserve a finite resource, or as part of a price stabilization scheme, or for reasons of national security. Mr. Speaker, in the case of crude oil, because of the International Energy Agency agreement going back a number of years, we would essentially be applying similar rules as agreed to at that time. And if there is any conflict between the commitments to the Free Trade Agreement and the IEA, then the latter would prevail. Mr. Speaker, whether there's an agreement or not, we would want to be known as reliable suppliers to our customers, and so that long-term contracts would be the basis for providing customers satisfactory service. So the intent would be to treat our customers fairly, whether it be United States or Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, the 2 main aspects that are positive would be assured markets for our supplies to the United States and improve access to those markets.
Calgary Buffalo supplementary.
Equal time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister's answer would have been as comprehensible to this House if he had given it in Russian. I stand by my example, but I'm wondering whether or not the minister would undertake to file before this House a paper outlining exactly how those cutback provisions under the free trade agreement will work, so that the people of this province can see something significant and in detail instead of being provided with half a page of puffery on one of the most significant natural gas supply issues to this country.
Mr. Speaker, I'd even go further by suggesting that I'd be happy to sit down and tutor the honourable member relative to the logic that he was using here yesterday.
Time for question period has expired. The chair would point out that on the desks of all honourable members there is a copy of the 77th birthday letter from the chairman of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, and this letter is on all honourable members' desks to take note of the fact that that anniversary occurs on the 18th day of this month. Orders of the day. Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I